So, moving on to Exhibit B here, another story in Scripture that proves God's sovereignty and man's lack of free will is the story of Joseph. Now, many of us have heard of the people of Israel. Israel is basically just a large family. God made a promise of land and a great many descendants to a guy by the name of Abraham. Abraham had a son named Isaac. Isaac had a son named Jacob. Jacob, after he wrestled with God, had his name changed to Israel. Israel's 12 sons make up the 12 tribes of Israel that produce the people that are the main players in Old Testament scripture. Now, Joseph was one of the 12 sons of Israel. He was the youngest of the 12 brothers, and Joseph and his brothers worked together for most of their early lives. However, Joseph at one point began having dreams that showed him one day ruling over his older brothers. Joseph revealed these dreams to his father, and his brothers became angry and jealous at Joseph. So one day, the 12 brothers were out in the field working, and Joseph's 11 brothers decided to kill him. But right before the brothers carried out their evil plot, they saw a group of Ishmaelites off in the distance. So they ended up selling Jacob to the Ishmaelites as a slave. And after they did this, they went home and told their father, Israel, that Jacob had been killed and eaten by a wild animal. So years went by, and Joseph became a servant in the king's house, in Pharaoh's house. He did a lot of good things and found favor with the king. So Pharaoh put Joseph in charge of the entire kingdom. Soon a famine came over the land, and Joseph's dad and brothers were starving. So Israel sent the brothers out to find food and go to Egypt to find this food. So Joseph was now in charge of giving food to starving people. So once his brothers came and they realized that this was Joseph, the one they sold and wanted to kill, they thought that Joseph was going to put them in jail or harm them in some way. Instead, Joseph fed his brothers and invited them and his father, as the story played out, to come live in Egypt. So Joseph said at this point to his brothers, he said, "What your brothers intended for evil, I intended for good." This is what God said. "What your brothers intended for evil, I intended for good. This was my plan all along, so that you would be in charge of the kingdom. Now I will have mercy on you and all of your brothers." Now that's paraphrased a little bit based on the story that I had written. I wrote this story to my children. I try to make it more readable to them. But basically, what God was saying was it was His plan. And we're going to see that even more here. So it was certainly an evil act by the brothers of Joseph. When his siblings came to Egypt for food, now these are the exact words that Joseph spoke. This is Joseph speaking to his brothers. Even though his brothers did this evil act where they sold him into slavery, they were going to kill him. Then they sold him into slavery to the Ishmaelites. Joseph says, "You devised evil against me, yet God, He devised it for good in order to accomplish, as at this day, to preserve many people alive." What Joseph is saying here, that even though his brothers did an evil thing, it was really God's plan. They were helpless to do anything else because God put it in them to do this evil in order to accomplish God's purpose. So the Almighty, He did this in order to put Joseph in a powerful position to save his family and many others by giving them food. Joseph would have never been raised to power in Egypt if he was not sold into slavery to the Ishmaelites by his brothers. This shows that God creates and uses evil to fulfill His purposes. Elsewhere, we have examples where God hardens Pharaoh's heart and he sends evil spirits on people. He does this in order to glorify himself, and he does this in order to fulfill his purposes and teach human beings lessons as they move through life in real time. So Joseph in this story is kind of like Jesus, and that he ends up saving the very people wanting to harm him. Just think of some of the things God must have done here in order to put Joseph in charge of Egypt. Remember, this was all God's doing to raise Joseph to power in Egypt. That was God's intention. That was his plan. So if that's his intention and his plan, then every detail leading up to that plan had to be intentional, had to be planned out by God. Because you can't have a major event planned out and then just let the details up that lead up to that event to be random. That can't happen that way. God has major things planned, and he plans each and every detail along the way to get to that plan. It can't be any way else. So, first, God gave Joseph the dream in the first place, right? Then God put jealousy in the 11 brothers' hearts and caused them to conspire to kill him. Then, right before they were going to kill him, he sends a group of Ishmaelites off in the distance, so they sell him to the Ishmaelites. After years of very specific details, Joseph gained favor with Pharaoh and was put in charge in the kingdom. And part of that detail was that Pharaoh at one point had a wife who liked Joseph and wanted to sleep with him. And Joseph refused, so Pharaoh's wife framed Joseph and claimed that he attempted to overpower her and basically have his way with her. She framed him. So eventually Joseph got sent to prison. And because he interpreted the dreams of the cupbearer and the baker properly, the next Pharaoh raised him up to interpret one of his dreams, so he was brought and restored back to the kingdom, and then eventually that's when he was given all this power. So all these details, years and years and years of details and intricate planning eventually led to Joseph being in charge of Egypt, in charge of giving out the food to everybody, therefore feeding his brothers and his father Israel. So God had that end goal in mind, and he used every detail in succession to get to that point. And he does the same thing with everybody's life. Does the same exact thing. He has specific plans, and every day, every moment, every detail is set in stone before you were even born, before one of those days even occur. It's all planned out. If any one of these details along the road to get Joseph to raise to power in Egypt did not occur, then God would have never fulfilled his intention of having Joseph save the family of Israel. Think of it. If he didn't send the Ishmaelites, Joseph would have been killed. That would have been the end of the story. If he didn't have Pharaoh's wife frame him for rape, he would have never been sent to prison, and then the next Pharaoh raising him out of prison because of the dreams he interpreted. If any of these details over years and years and years don't occur, then God does not fulfill his intention. But God always fulfills his intention, and he always uses each and every little detail to get to that intention. So there's nothing that is outside of his control, nothing that happens that he doesn't plan for. It's all of God.